Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome back to those of you who have already participated in our webinar series, Human-Centered Digital Transformation, and a big welcome to those of you who are new. I have with me today two experts in service design. Let's see if we can get them on the screen. All right. Hi, Antonio. Hi, Peter.
Hello.
Hey, Steve.
Welcome, guys. So, Antonio Iadarola is coming to us from New York City. Antonio studied design in Italy, Belgium, and New York. He is a teacher and a consultant of design throughout the world in Asia, Europe, North America. He's the founder of a service design studio. And now he is the VP of user experience and service design for JPMorganChase in New York. And he is also the co-founder of the Service Design Network New York City chapter. And Antonio's main focus now is employee experience and workplace design. Welcome, Antonio. It's great that you joined us, and it's morning there in New York, so good morning.
Thank you for having us.
All right. And Peter, a bit closer to Europe here in Geneva. Peter Horvath is an economist by training, and he has his MBA from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, the EPFL, for those of you in the neighborhood. He is the co-founder of the Service Design Network's Swiss chapter. And he is the service design and strategy lead for Whitespace. I'm Steve Ritchie, your host. I'm also a consultant for Whitespace, an agency, digital transformation consultancy based in Geneva, Switzerland, with projects all over Europe and the world. So I'd like to get started. One thing. Please introduce yourself in the comments. Tell us your role, your location, your company, and any experience you've had with service design. Some of you wrote to me before this session and said, hey, what is service design? What does it have to do with digital? Some of you are practitioners. Some of you have read about it, never worked with anybody who's done it. So we're trying to kind of reach out to all of you. So, but more I'm curious, but I haven't really had a lot of contact with it. I'll start by giving you a little bit of context briefly about how we see this fitting into our series and what does service design have to do with digital transformation. Then we'll start at the basics. What is service design? And Antonio and Peter will give you a glimpse into how service designers work, what value they bring, how they collaborate with others. And then we'll step back and kind of get a bit of a view of the larger impact of service design within digital transformation within companies. Okay. So already introduced those guys. So digital transformation context. So as I mentioned, this is part of a series. We've already covered an introduction to human-centered digital transformation and stakeholder alignment. And today we're talking about service design. Next up in January is discovery research. And then in February, design thinking. There's one thing that is in common here, and it's that human-centered design aspect of digital transformation. At the end of the day, we are talking about human behavior. And those of us trained in design look at how these artifacts and these services we're creating impact human behavior. So that's the kind of the line that runs through all of these. And service design is really, really at the heart of that. Why service design? At the very beginning of our series, we looked at our definition of digital transformation is integrating digital technologies into organizations to fundamentally change how they operate and deliver value to customers and stakeholders. Service design really addresses that, changing how an organization operates and delivers value. Not just observing it and noting it and analyzing it, but actually changing it. Something else we discussed in our last two episodes were the main three causes of digital transformation failure. One is lack of clear leadership, vision, strategy. Number two is products and services that are misaligned with people's contexts and needs. So here we come again to human behavior. So human beings doing work, doing things, and the products and services that our organizations are creating aren't matching up well enough. So that's another cause of failure. And then an underestimation of change and communication. So for us, that's why we're talking about service design today. We see these service design playing into the larger picture of digital transformation. All right. So we're going to start with just some basics here. And service design, first of all, it's a thing. It's not just three guys with beards on a screen talking to you about something they made up. This has been around for a good long while. And it's been around in industries, physical industries, hotel industry, tourism. It's been a public health, public services, anywhere where you got a bunch of people trying to coordinate things together. People have been looking at this. Now, recently, this has moved more into digital. And it's starting to look at how our digital tools and the things behind those digital tools, those people offering services, are synced up or not to offer those services. It started, a lot of service designers were external, and then like Peter is a consultant, and a lot of service designers are in-house, like Antonio working at JPMorganChase. And JPMorganChase is not alone. Other big financial service companies, public services, governments, manufacturing companies are bringing service designers in-house, and they are touching digital a lot. Not only digital, but they're touching digital. So, Peter, let's start with you. Here's the definition, a working definition of service design. That is solution agnostic. It's a human-centered practice. It aligns stakeholders, services, and processes. Does all of these things to deliver employee and customer experiences that create business value. But kind of unpack that for us. That's a dense definition.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the intro, Steve. I mean, yes, each of these points is, a thing that we can zoom in on. What I would say, really looking at the first one on the solution agnostic, it's one of the more important ones, in my opinion. You mentioned that the service design is moving into digital. I would say that it's a solution agnostic approach. And when people ask me around, how is this different from other practices? What I always say, one of the first things is that in service design, when you start out in a project, you don't actually know what the end result will be. You don't know whether it will be a training, an app, a website, a meeting, because there are many solutions to the problems. And at the outset, the solution really is could be anything. And service design really plays in all of the possible solutions. So it's really solution agnostic. The human-centered part, goes without saying, it fits really with the webinar content here, is that it primarily looks and feeds from the human side on both ends, meaning both the customers and also the employees. So the internal and external stakeholders are equally important in a proper and robust service design approach. And this aligning stakeholder services and processes is really what it does. It, of course, not only aligning, there's a lot of creation as well, but a lot of that creation focuses on this, making sure that things work together. It's really connecting the individual dots and steps and touch points within a service process, but also connecting the internal departments of an organization. And what I always argue for is that service design should sort of lean in, and its primary focus really should be on this connection, should be basically incentivized, and that should be its main element, that it connects the different parts of a service or a company, whereas other elements focus in more on silos. It should be cross silos. So I already mentioned the employee and customer focus, and it's important, though, that service design is not just about an experience, but it connects with the business value. So it's really balancing the employee and the company side of the coin. So although it fits very nicely with this human-centered digital transformation, it is also at the same time company-centric. I don't know, Antonio, do you want to jump in on any of those points to add some detail or to argue? It's all about sort of co-creation and tackling it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Peter, and thank you everybody for having me. Yeah, I mean, I just want to give like a perspective that adds to your, very comprehensive explanation, because, oftentimes when we talk about customer experience, user journeys, all these kind of buzzwords that are around, service design, we think that's something highly theoretical, and it is strategic. So obviously, sometimes it's hard to grasp the sort of like output of the service designer work. But just kind of like connecting with what you're saying, I think there are a few things that we really do on a daily basis as service designers, and I think we can really summarize them in 3 or 4 points, and you can kind of like then jump in and tell me if you see that differently. But it's really about what we call discovery, which is like starting from understanding how the users behave and experience your product and service, not just from one point of view of a single product or a single piece of the service, but really like where do the customer come from. If you take like one of the classic example of airports or traveling, obviously like you go to the airport and you interact with an airline, but then there is like a stage before that, even like weeks or months before, where you book your ticket and then you need to get there. So this kind of end-to-end customer journey, it's really what we start as service designer, really understanding how your customer get to your product and service. How do they experience that? How do they live that experience? And we call that discovery. And generally the sort of let's say outcome of that part of the work is what we call journey maps or service blueprint. Moving then on, how do we help the organization to build a service, so to build a product? This idea of prototyping is very powerful. We are generally the group of people within the organization that start earlier to build things, not for the sake of implementing things, but just to kind of like create a discussion around how things should work. And so creating prototypes, creating things that you can break and try things out, it's something that, again, the service designer is engaged with on a daily basis. And I mean, again, I bring up the classic question, what's then the difference with UX? UX focus on a specific interaction or a specific part of the product, whereas service design really look at like the end-to-end experience. So they work in concert. And then, like you mentioned customer and employee experience, and how do we help businesses to be more efficient. As an employee experience service designer in a very large organization, I speak with frontline employees on a weekly basis. So I'm in charge of building. I don't want to talk a lot about things I cannot share about a financial institution, but I work on platforms and interfaces that bankers use every day to serve customers. And so it's very important to kind of keep that feedback loop going. And so I speak with real people. It's not just like, I build this kind of digital interface and I kind of like track data. We do that, but we also do speak with the actual people that use the digital products. We understand how the digital product in the context of a physical space, which is diagnostic part of service design. In the context, actually, yeah, I love this illustration. That's perfect. In the context of a physical space, which is like a bank, help serving customer, help having conversation with customers, and have like a digital tool that suggests maybe what to say, or helps tracking data, or helps capturing very meaningful information for the banker to then use and help customers. And so whereas a UX designer might be more focused on building the perfect interface, as a service designer, we connect those dots, but they are very concrete dots. So that's my 2 cents on service design. Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, it's good points, and I actually wanted to say that this at the beginning is as theoretical as we should get. So hopefully we'll have some questions also from the audience, and some opportunities to to share some specific stories, because I think this lays a good foundation. But also all of those listening, again, if you have any questions, then please feel free to add in the comments.
Guys, I want to ask you a question. You mentioned all this, Peter. You really dwell on this idea of connection and alignment. I'm seeing a relation between service design and size, scale. Like I think it's no accident, right, that the big organizations are the ones that are hiring service designers now. They've gotten too big, too many products, too many services, but yet maybe their customer types still haven't changed. There's just a few customer types, but the organization are you seeing that? I mean, JPMorgan is not a small institution, Antonio. Is that?
It's a larger bank in the US and probably in the world, if you exclude the very large Chinese ones. But I think, yes, that's a great point. And I didn't add in the initial explanation, like the main things that we do, yes, is discovery, prototyping, this kind of like feedback loop, and kind of taking care of the end-to-end experience. The other thing is storytelling. It's huge. Again, because we have this kind of end-to-end experience. I mean, as a design lead, so as a like basically manager, I spend good 50% of my time having session with multiple groups, multiple teams that take care of different aspects of different products, and just bring them together to kind of like, basically advocate for connecting all those pieces of the experience. And so, of course, there are silos that sometimes are, I mean, there is like a very classic kind of like tension between product and experience, because product teams tend to kind of like have a roadmap and build, and they need to kind of like follow that, whereas like an experienced designer is more interested in kind of making everything work together. And so I think that's a classic tension. But I think more than that is like, how do you give visibility to all product teams and business teams into all the silos? So it's not. I mean, people sometimes are very open to to work on the end-to-end experience. They need to know what's happening on the other side of a large organization. And so the service designer, through this kind of journey mapping and discovery, capturing client insights, part of our job is also to bring those information around, simply speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, to jump on what you mentioned around the size. On the one hand, it's size, but sort of also sort of the complexity, but not just of the organization, but the world we live in. So if you think of how we engaged with each other or with companies just 20 years ago, it's very different to how we do it now. And with that complexity, it's not enough to like, okay, every department needs to work better. It also is a question, okay, how are these connected? And also, as Antonio mentioned, how do we really, as an organization, connect with what comes before us and what comes after? So really bringing this external view and outside-in view to how the company operates is one of the core elements, I think, of a lot of types of designers and design, but especially of service design, because of its sort of overarching and solution agnostic nature. So there's, we love to see things as static. Well, this is how things are, that we have these departments, and these is how a company functions. But you go back to the 1980s, and back then companies still needed to make there were still discussions around whether strategic management should be a practice within companies. And today strategic management is obviously a part of companies, but until the 1980s it wasn't, because it wasn't that complexity. It was different. Now we come to another phase where things are again changing, and maybe there needs to be more focus and more rethinking of how a company actually operates. So this is where these types of considerations come in.
Yeah, I'm seeing that, Peter, and Antonio, here in Europe, a lot of our clients and prospects that are coming to us are asking us, we're delivering little bits of products, very well designed. They're putting UX designers on, this product, product A, product B, product C, and they are given a task to improve that product. And what our clients are starting to ask us, but shouldn't we be using this input from users at the higher level to even know if we should be calling that a product or merging that as two products? And I think you've mentioned you're working on several different CRM systems, right? Did you see a role of getting up above the level of an individual product? Is that where you live and your team lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I am familiar with European ecosystem and market, because I started my agency that I now left, but I started in London. So I used to work for like much smaller clients and startups. So I understand that scenario. Yes. So I think that comes with the idea of how mature are we as a practice within an organization. So obviously, as you start, I mean, let's face it, like even like a simple digital product tends to be always very complex and so I think service design can work at the micro level where, okay, let's start understanding the experience on a specific product, and there's nothing wrong with it, focusing on a specific product and optimize that experience. And then as most of your product within a mid-sized organization, small organization work from an experience perspective, then you try to kind of connect them. So it's a matter of approach, and you can start. I mean, if you are very like ambitious, of course, you can start say, okay, let's all stop the iteration of each product. Let's kind of work on the holistic experience. That's contextual, and I mean there are different strategies to go about that. But by the end of the day, we need to say that service design is something that, as any expertise, and as Peter was mentioning, the strategic management, all that. I mean, you need to kind of like plant the seed and start practicing it a little bit. And there's nothing wrong to do like very simple user research, very simple prototyping to start with, and then build the practice. So actually, that connects with another point I want to make, which is the idea of internal, external, so in-house service design or external service design. So kind of like working with consultants and experts, which is kind of constantly shifting, right? Because of course, to start the service design practice, as any practice, we saw that with UX, a few decades ago, UX designers were external, they were agencies, and they would help an organization, and then eventually most organizations now have internal UX teams. If you work on a digital product, you most likely want to build an internal team. You don't want to constantly work with an agency. But of course, with service design, a lot of external experts are very good, and they're specializing in helping you building that practice. And that's work I've done with my agency for almost 10 years. Most of our projects were about, okay, where are you at in terms of user centricity? So, some organizations do service design without calling it service design. And so, it's important to detect those practices and then start from there. And then maybe kind of having an approach that is a bit more systematic, and understand how you apply service design in its different shapes and forms.
Guys, I want to jump back to the screen of some really specific activities that service designers do. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the things. We're going to have a session on discovery research, and you've mentioned that, Antonio, and we're going to have a whole other webinar about that. I don't think we need to cover that too much. Prototyping and testing is also interesting. I want to dive first into the things that are quite special, and that's what caught my eye when I first heard about service design a few years ago, was this journey design and journey management. And Antonio, could you start just by kind of unpacking what does this mean? Journey design and journey management.
Yeah, I think I'll address them together. So again, journey management is the idea that you again have individual journeys for each of your product. Use a product, and there's a certain experience that you go from like the user finding your product, signing up, using it, coming back, because some users don't come back. So, those are different phases, and leave the product. What happens after I complete that task or that jobs to be done within that product? Is it connected with another experience? Does it leave the user confused? Does it leave the user supported by follow-up interactions? And that's a journey, right? Now, it becomes harder when you think that maybe your product has different audiences, so different target groups or personas, you can call them different ways. And so that one experience actually start branching out in like multiple experiences, and it connects with multiple products within your ecosystem or externally. The example of the airline is something that I always do, because, I might need to take an Uber before connecting me, before going to catch my flight. If the Uber doesn't park where my flight is, then I need to kind of like take an internal, transfer within the airport, and that's not a good experience. So, sometimes you need to deal with all those experiences that are around your core business, essentially. And so that's journey management. It's basically like kind of mapping out the entire ecosystem. And it's important because if you do that well, it's like a heat map. Then it detects where you have gaps in your experience, and maybe it informs strategic management, to Peter's point, actually, because it's sometimes surprising how problems lie on a phase of the experience where you wouldn't expect to need to be focusing. I have an example of a few years back on a very complex trading platform that we were doing for investment banking. that the actual problem wasn't on onboarding. The actual problem was on like the users starting like the first couple of steps. Whereas maybe the client asks us, okay, let's focus on improving the time to market or the experience within the trading moment. And then through journey management, we realize, no, I mean, the problem lies before, because they are confused when they sign up or when they onboard a certain thing. And then when they get to actually the trading part, they miss some information and there is something confusing, and then they make a mistake. But the mistake is generated earlier.
Peter, you talk about that. Peter, you talk about that a lot, about looking at the next thing, why is this problem happening? And this kind of touches on the analysis and the systemic design, right? Like stepping back a bit.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd add to this one is it's a friend of mine who had this experience at a large telco, that each of the departments was fully convinced that they are doing their utmost to satisfy users, and they were convinced that they're excellent. And what it turned out is they are individually, but at the drop-off points and when customers are transferred from one department to the next in their natural journey through their interaction with the company, that's when the experience broke, and no one was paying attention to that. Everyone was focused in on their silo versus looking at, okay, how do people go through these? So I think that's really important in the journey design. It's like defining how people navigate through, but then journey management is not only knowing this, but then making sure that the organization and the departments are connected along that journey, and really that this experience is sustained and continues to work and even monitored, and not just the individual, but also these sort of drop-offs or handoff points are managed as well.
Yeah. Peter, something else you talk about, I want to interrupt you. Peter, you talk a lot about incentives. It's enough for well-intentioned professionals to want to work with the silo to their left and the silo to their right. But when push comes to shove and budgets start getting cut, and your job is to do this one thing in your silo, if somebody's not incentivized, that connection doesn't happen. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how you've seen organizations dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, even if they are incentivized, is it their top priority? That's the real question. And I think that's why if you look at the capabilities or the tasks that need to be delivered as a service designer, it's not only a certain type of person. I mean, it is a certain type of person who's inclined to like this, but it doesn't mean that they work as a service designer. So other people can, fulfill some of those tasks as well. And a lot of effort in service design and design in general goes into co-creation and working together with people. And a lot of these capabilities can be internalized by a lot of people within the organization. It's really this, is it your core activity that to ensure this connection, between the departments, between the touch points, between the elements? That's really the important thing that I think speaks to a need to have service design or a capability that focuses on this element.
And if I can add something to that, and also related to kind of the idea of journey design, because here on the slide I see front stage and backstage, macro and micro. So I think those are very interesting things to unpack. To Peter's point, the incentive is important, and also as service design, I mean, the other metaphor I want to introduce is the idea of currency, meaning you need to give them different things. So the idea of journey management, journey design is, for a front stage kind of like redesign, for instance, maybe that journey that I'm gonna provide to the UX team or to the product team is a very granular journey where they can kind of see like interaction by interaction what they need to kind of refine and build. But for senior leadership, for instance, they need to kind of have like a more strategic view, and so I need to summarize those content into something that is kind of give them, okay, where is it that we need to invest the next budget, And so currency in the sense of like, even if you do this kind of like macro mapping exercise and you have a journey management that is really comprehensive, then you always have the storytelling piece where you kind of like cut a piece of the pie and you give different piece of the pies for different stakeholders to use it. I mean, the incentive comes with like how easy it is to use what you gave me. I can download and just kind of like share everything I have on my documentation to all stakeholders. They don't gonna be able to read the same things.
And I see a comment from Adil Mira in the chat, who's mentioning one of the big challenges now is sort of having these experience maps and blueprints and the repository. And I would add on to that, it's not having a repository, it's having this as a tool. So I think one of the changes that has been ongoing in the past, couple of years really is taking these from visuals into management tools.
Yes.
So really that a blueprint is like, okay, yeah, now nice, now I see how the flow works. That's not where the value lies. The value lies in that, everyone having access to the full flow, you can dig into, okay, where are some data points? And a good and very simple example is just, again, on this dropping up points, on how do you know when there's a problem in a service? Like I was, visiting a hospital and was sent to another department for a specific checkup. And the doctor wanted to be nice with me so I can do it before work and send me at an early appointment. I think it was like 7 o'clock or 6:30. I went there and of course the department was not open yet. So just having this sort of overarching view and knowing, having the data on when other departments are open, as simple as that, like when can I refer this person to another place? That's really important. And, these things need to be there. So as Antonio said, this, what do I give a department or a team? It might just be, the access to the information that they actually need to properly function.
Yeah, and I think the next stage to that, talking about maturity, is the idea of, it's always easier when stakeholders are part of the process instead of showing, making them participate. In the context of journey mapping or journey management, is the idea of governance. So now, as you said, like it's not a static document; it's a document that needs to update essentially like every quarter, or because as product updates, then the experience slightly change, and then you keep that picture up to date. And ideally, it's everybody doing that. It's not really like the service designer job to do that work. The service designer set it up and maintain it. But the idea of a shared governance is the idea that all stakeholders contribute with additional insights and data, and basically become almost like a repository for everybody to just constantly work on. Mm-hmm. Nobody does that well. I think I remember starting in service design 10 years ago, where we were advocating for this user-centric approach. And I think now another organization, as Steven said, embedded internal capacity, and everybody's doing that. I think the next stage is really like service design groups within this organization doing that for everybody else. So it's like the entire organization that in their culture, they have this kind of idea of doing service design with some experts that obviously guide the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, guys, I want to ask you both about objectives. One thing is to connect the dots. At the end of that dot is an objective that everybody along the chain should be aiming for. Do you get involved in discussions about literally setting OKRs for team members? Or Antonio, are your team members that are sometimes embedded on product teams, their objectives, their annual bonuses and their reviews are based on OKRs within their product teams? How does it work? I'm having trouble seeing how that works transversely.
Yes. Sorry. No, that's a super. First of all, working on employee experience, if we change something in an employee tool, they might modify their workflow, and then maybe their incentive is sort of affected. So we need to be very careful about that. So that's just to start with, in terms of what do we deliver, and inversely, if we improve the way for those employees to achieve their incentive goals, that's also an impact that we create. There are different to the other part of the question, which is how do you structure the team and the kind of like OKR of the product team and design team. There are different models. I'm not going to talk a lot about our model at JPMorganChase, but I can say that we have like partnership. We have a quad, so we have like design, product, tech, and data. So we don't have designer working in the product team. We are like 4 different teams within a macro team, and so we just kind of like partner with each other. But yes, so there are 2 types. I think there are 2 types of OKR that we can talk about. Definitely, service design consume strategic objectives coming from senior leadership. But then again, the ideal scenario, and it's partially happening in a lot of organizations, is that there is a loop where, okay, you digest those strategic priorities and OKR and yearly objectives, and then you kind of like you react to them by saying, okay, that's where we are at with the quality of our experience, so with the sort of like with the kind of like impact of our product, and that's what we can change. And so that kind of delta is basically your design OKR. And I try to describe that without getting technical, but that's essentially you can. I think based on strategic priorities, you can always understand, okay, that's what design can do. Going from A to B, design cannot solve everything, but you can kind of like digest those strategic priority and sort of like define where you can get.
Regarding the A, before you go A to B, how early, ideally, do you get involved in?
As early as possible. Move left is the keyword that I've been learning moving in house.
Move left. I like that.
Move left. Shift left, actually. So as early as possible. Yes, that's.
I would argue that it's before it's decided whether it's A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3. So ideally, it should be before a product or service is being defined. Service design should actually be part of definition of whether a service or product is needed. It should be there at not even the initiation. It should be there at thinking about whether anything or what should be initiated. So fully agree with this sort of move left and actually be a driver for all of these things. And on this part, because you mentioned around the impacts and then sort of what's driven and OKRs. On the one hand, like obviously, not every tool and not this connection is not only an element of service design. So there's practices that are used in various organizations to ensure, on the one hand, this overarching understanding, and on the other hand, the front-facing element of the organization. And I think hospitality and travel do this particularly well. I think partly also, I don't have the academic background on that, but in hotel industry, it's very common for people to be going up in the ranks and staying within the industry for a very long time, and so they always have this customer contact. They just carry it through with them. And in Lufthansa, for example, which is all around the flying and transport experience, even the people who equip and are in charge of equipping the new airplanes, even they every year have a certain number of days that they need to spend, not necessarily in customer facing roles, but in a customer facing setting. So just travel along, take a flight, and maybe help or just be there to witness how their work in the back end really sort of impact the front end, and just to be there to observe. And it's again your point earlier, Steve, on the scale. It's really, this could be done anywhere else, and without potentially service design as a role to drive it. But whose role is it to drive it then? So really, this sort of connection is an important piece. And if you think sort of product owners and product managers, and you could ask well, they should be focusing in on this. What I think is important is the flow of information. So product owners, product managers will be looking at their specific responsibility and making sure that information from the entire organization flows into that, so you can create the best product or service piece that they're responsible for. And service design should be there on the other end of that information flow to ensure that information, that product or service is going out into the rest of the organization, and there are these connections made across these product and service steps.
Yeah. I mean, I think also it's interesting to talk about objectives, because it's a bit dependent to industries. So I mean, we've been talking about delighting the customer, and the assumption is that you delight the customer with a great experience, and they come back and they use your product more, and then basically like impacts the revenue. That's kind of like pretty much how service design started. I would say But then there are scenarios where, for example, I work a lot for government, for the Ontario government, modernizing most of their digital systems. And for government, I mean, you don't have a choice to use a public service. I mean, you're gonna use that public service. There's no alternative. They don't need to win customers. But citizens obviously use those services a lot, and for government is the cost saving. So the optimization part on the back end, it's what's the value of service design in that context. And that's the case for a lot of private sector as well. Even just maintaining a large tech product design department, if you repeat things multiple times and all these kind of products, maybe focus on research and analysis of things that maybe are already being researched or analyzed, then that's not an optimal way of investing those money. So, I mean, the kind of optimization and cost cutting is a big thing. And then the other thing is the market readiness. I mean, you are just faster if you have this kind of holistic vision. It takes some time to set it up. It takes some time, maybe, there's this idea of like time boxing, maybe time for really deepening the relationship you have with your customers and the understanding of your customer experience. And it feels like it's slow, but then it accelerates the implementation of things because you know what you are building or what you should build to satisfy the customer. And so the ready to market is one of the key metric when you work with startups. But even like I work in the context of digital banks in Europe, where the bank was huge, but that's a different bank. That's not JPMorganChase, it's ING. But then they are like internal startup accelerators where they wanted to really kind of very quickly test new services. So they were like internal startups. Mm-hmm. And so the ready to market piece is important in that context.
I want to go back to your point, Antonio, about the Ontario government, about a captive audience. You're not selling a shiny digital product to consumers that are competing with a bunch of other. You've got a captive audience of people sitting in the government working. And a lot of times they're buying tools. Oh, yeah. And I find it fascinating that service designers are brought in not to design all the screens. The screens are coming out of Salesforce or the CRM or the.
Yeah, typically.
What's your experience like? Do you struggle to communicate that? I mean, that idea of designers are still needed even when tools are brought in, and even if you're not selling shiny digital products to consumers outside in the world.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship that those public services public agencies have with vendors, so technologies like Salesforce or others, even database technologies, even like honestly like program management technologies, it's a big part of their yearly budget. And so in that context, I think there is a lot of evaluation that we've been working on. And sometimes it's like choosing the right vendor and assessing them. It becomes a bit more technical, but again, how do you assess a vendor? I mean, they're all great. I mean, some are better than others from an engineering perspective, but then, bringing the user centricity or citizen-centric view where, okay, is this vendor able to customize their technology for the need of the citizen? Yes, no, and what is the citizen experience that we need there? That's a big part of it. And then also sometimes the decision of like, okay, do we build this in-house or we buy it from a vendor? It's not always possible, but sometimes you have the two options. And so, then that's a form of service design that, again, doesn't build the shiny up. Prototyping is still involved because you do prototype things and test and say, okay, that's how we need that thing to look like. And then we evaluate what's the best option for that to be acquired.
We had a question, and this is for both of you. We had very early on in the webinar about AI, specifically Gen AI and service design. And our clients are coming to us more and more saying, oh, yeah, we're sorting out the tech, but our people aren't using it. And I'm just, or they don't trust it, or things like this. So I know, Peter, you've done a lot of work with AI, and Antonio, I'm thinking that's probably hitting your reality now too. What can you guys say about that? The role, answering that the question about role of service designers with Gen AI initiatives.
I think there's many sort of ways to go into that. one important piece is that it's one technology. So again, being the solution agnostic element, I think it's whenever like, hey, let's have a Gen AI product, is Gen AI really the solution that's needed to fill that need? So I think it's on the one hand on this challenging, is it the right thing to invest in? Obviously, there's a lot of experimentation going on, which is great because it itself is part of this prototyping that Anto mentioned. What I would also add is there's this challenge that Gen AI is on the one hand, or on one hand, hasn't been designed well. It's not that it fits a specific need. It actually is a something that we are still collectively figuring out what it is, where it's useful, and how good it actually is. Like, in all parts where it's being introduced, there's still a lot of research being done on what it does. Does it actually do it well? And then a very important piece in there is that it needs to change our thinking about technology. And I think that hasn't been, because like AI, Gen AI has been dropped into society, and we are used to computers or machinery either working or not working, or not working very well, and you see where it's not working. But in this case, we're actually interacting with a computer where we are used to things always working out in a specific way, or I always knowing that I can trust things. And now we are in a kind of solution where the machine tells us that something specific. It acts as if we can trust it, but it's not necessarily there. That trust is there. It's a question mark, and we need to be aware of, as people, like how much do we trust the outputs? And service design and UX design together, I think, both need to be looking at how do we then build the next generation of AI tools, which are built on these platforms that have existed, for the past 2 years or so. How do we build a layer on top of them that actually make them work better, more aligned to people's needs and to the way that they think about interacting with the machine?
Great. Thanks, guys. We're going to open up for a few more questions. Before we do that, I want to move on to something, just get the most specific we can and show you guys some work in progress. I mean, this is, this is a lot of the talk about what you guys do. This is journey design, which is then you can base journey management off of this, right? Service blueprinting, like how things flow together, the front stage, the backstage. We're not going to go into all these in detail. I just wanted to show people that there is a use of what we called earlier, these boundary objects that allow people across functions to start talking and imagining as is, as you said, Antonio, the A, and then how to get to B. And these tools are key. And both of you mentioned quite a few times co-creation, collaboration. It seems like you never work with just one function in your job, right? It seems like it's always cross-functional. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, it's very fair. And I think to add to the list of like main things that we do, okay, discovery, okay, prototyping, okay, helping helping teams to operationalize our intention. And then there's one storytelling that I already mentioned, and the other one is facilitation. I think if you have like even a couple of people to start with in your organization that are good at storytelling and facilitating those sessions, that's the starting point. That's like it's like you need to know how to run, to play soccer, and then you learn the skills, and so yes, even within my team, I run service design projects that are hybrid with UX because the output is essentially always UX. But even within a service design team, you have a researcher, you have a UX UI designer, you might have like a project manager. I mean, you might have different expertise within the service design team. So it's a very hybrid discipline, I would say.
And yeah, I mean, to answer that, there are parts where it's only sort of one type of organization or one organization, but very often then that the service design interacts, but very often then the whole point of the interaction is how does that team interact with the rest of the organization. So although on that very specific project you only deal with HR, you only deal with a tech function or a support function, but then very often the topic of that activity will be how do we work better with the others? Where do we really fit in? So it is very almost all the time something that touches on many different types of responsibilities.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is it's not just I moved this next slide. It's not just a user experience or a journey. At some point, especially as senior as you guys are, you start changing how the organizations are going to do that in the future. You start changing how the organizations are delivering value, even if a new customer type comes up, right? This is new connective tissue and new muscles to do new things. Are you seeing? Can you tell us some stories about that, Antonio? Some of the work you've done, not necessarily JPMorganChase. I know you're not going to tell us a lot about your current employer, but maybe some of the other work where you've actually, when you were done, they were looking at how they delivered products and services differently.
Yeah, I mean, so can I give you a couple examples? Yeah, like a few years back, I was working for one of the main real estate developer of shopping centers in Europe. And I remember that their need was to really create places that wouldn't look like shopping malls, because obviously they want to create they want to foster interactions and community and create places that were good for people while they also had like a commercial purpose. And so I remember doing a lot of co-design and participatory design. I mean, basically kind of involving different communities, universities, schools, customers, executives in co-creating solutions for the shared space that they had in between shops. So there was a plaza, there was like a educational garden, there were a bunch of like different activities you could do. And I mean, of course, you can come up with those activities and with those services within the shopping center. But the idea there was, I remember we were kind of like setting up those spaces overnight. And I said to a few executives, you need to come overnight to prototype with us. And they were like, what are you talking about? We don't pay you for keeping us awake at night. I said, no, you have to see it, because we're gonna have employees, and we're gonna have like all the logistic people that is there to make this operational. And they came and they understood how employees would use those spaces, and how, from a logistic perspective, so the backstage work, implementing something overnight or changing the space of the shopping mall overnight. And I think that was eye-opening. So the impact there was like, okay, now I understand exactly how my service work, even like on the field. Plus, I always gonna create co-design processes to develop new solutions. And then we left as consultants. We left after a few years, and they're still doing it. So that's fun. Yeah. Very
Peter?
cool.
Yeah. Shopping mall. We can all imagine that. Yeah.
Which question, Steve?
Impacts that you've had on organizations, like how they're going to start delivering better products and services in the future after you've walked out of there.
Yeah, I think one is sort of playbooks, which is when it comes to designing processes, will often be one of the outputs. The dangerous thing with those is that it again, like journey maps, they also need to be managed. So it's about one hand creation, but they also on the other hand management. There is a process that we're doing with a client right now where there was a need identified on aligning the different teams better together, which is a perfect sort of design approach or challenge to face. Okay, how do we do that? And together the decision was to do a workshop. We did a couple of iterations on it, and at the end, okay, like this seems to work, so let's capture that in the playbook. We did that, and many months later, the client came back. Okay, there's been some evolution, and some other teams have joined up as well. So let's run again these workshops. And already in the very first discussions, it was clear that there was some evolution of the internal structures in the organization in the meantime, meaning that the playbook needed to be a bit adjusted, but not by a lot, but really just like the things that were separate needed to be merged together, and then another element needed to be added on to the activity. We did that and have been able to run, with some tweaks that same process a couple of times. And we've actually been doing that together with people in the organization. It's very important not to underestimate the subject matter expertise that are needed in co-creation. So really, I think it's been a really beautiful collaboration in terms of us working together at the very beginning to define what this should be, then fine-tuning it, gradually handing it off so that the organization can run these activities themselves. And then, later on, maybe in a couple of months, we'll be called back again because the process has changed. But that happened with other systems as well. We were involved early on, and then the organization felt, okay, we have a lot of things to work on. And then we were out for, I think, almost a year. And then they came back, like, we've reached a level of complexity where we again need to think about how these things are pulled together.
Great.
There's a question on the screen again.
Yeah, question. Job position for ops in service design. So service ops, or is it part of DevOps?
I would say there are two. One is research ops, and the other one is design ops. So it's very important. I mean, actually, great segue to Peter's point, like, toolkit and methodologies and playbooks. Then, how do they work on a day-to-day? And so, design ops people really focus on that. So that's one. And research ops, there's a lot that comes into play when you plan research at that scale. And so again, because you are taking that time to do research before making any decision, if you have a research op capacity or person, you can optimize that time. So that's very important. So recruitment, what different user groups we should focus on, the logistic of setting up different type of sessions, in person, digital. There's a lot that can be done there.
Yeah, great. And thanks, I would add to that journey ops. Again, it's this is basically journey management, which is, I think, one of those elements which is more service design specific than research ops or design ops, which is across many different types of design or research activities.
Guys, we're running out of time, and one of the things we'd like to do is for you, the audience, leave you with 3 questions. So this is your homework. You've heard from experts in Europe and the US now, and we want you, when you go back to your organization, to think about these things. So number 1 question, how deeply do our senior decision makers and the product and service teams observe and understand the end-to-end journeys of employees and customers? Do they at all? How often do they? And how deeply do they feel it inside that they understand the end-to-end journeys? We talked a lot about incentives in the middle part of this webinar. Who in your organization is incentivized to improve the end-to-end experiences for your employees and your customers? And then finally, yes, you are observing and understanding end-to-end journeys. You've got people who are incentivized to improve those journeys. All this understanding that they're gathering, is this being used to make strategic decisions? Is this being used to choose which problems or opportunities the organization is going to move forward with in the next quarter, in the next year, in the next 2 to 3 years? So we're going to end with these questions. We'll leave them. And I want to thank you, Antonio, for joining us from New York City. Peter, thank you for joining us. If you have any more questions, you can drop some questions in LinkedIn. There are a lot of great input from, I think, quite a few service designers in our comments. But if you've got some questions, drop them there. Here at Whitespace, it's info@whitespace.ch. Contact us if you've got some questions or if you want to get into this in more depth. And I'm going to go back really quickly. We've got in January, let's see if I can get that back up again, the session on discovery research. And in February, the session on design thinking. I think Jesse put in the LinkedIn channel at the very beginning a link to these dates, so you can sign up on LinkedIn for the sessions. That's it, guys. We're at minute 59. Thank you very much. We hope this was useful for all of you involved in digital transformation, and we'll see you back in January for discovery research.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.